Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to another video. I apologise, this one's a little late. It's 3 days ago this article here has dropped, but basically you may have been wondering why election coverage, specifically election coverage that alleges fraud or that covers fraud cases, or that generally is supportive of the anti-fraud movement, has been disappearing off YouTube. For the sake of of what we're about to go through, I have to say to anyone who's watching this from YouTube, I am not using this video to allege widespread fraud. So, supporting the 2020 US election. It's really interesting the way that this is framed, because the US election has not been called yet. Whilst many states have been certified, whilst many states have been putting their results forward, the electors have not gone forward, the Electoral College has not voted, the process has not completed, and therefore the categoric results of this election are still in question. The legal cases brought forward by the Trump administration and by his legal team and by other concerned citizens are also ongoing. Now, many of them are being thrown out, but many others are still ongoing, and it'll be interesting to see what the results of those are, with no commentary on which way I would expect those to go, or on the legitimacy of those claims. But basically, YouTube has said, updates to our work supporting the integrity of the 2020 US election. Over the past weeks and months, we've seen people coming to YouTube to learn more about where and how to vote, or learning more about a candidate or an issue, as expected. You know, people come, they don't trust the mainstream media, they come to YouTube. And also, just people use YouTube anyway. We've seen news organizations grow their audience. Now, news organizations is a very specific heading, and I want you to keep that in mind for the rest of this video. We've seen people turn to YouTube for the latest election results, or simply to follow an historic event with the highest voting turnout in over a century in the US. Again, disputed. I wish I could do a Twitter. This claim is disputed. Although I do expect that this is actually a correct statement. The race is not won until it's won, until every vote is counted and certified. So our main goal going into the election season was to make sure we're connecting people with authoritative information. And that's, again, a very important thing to note, while also limiting the reach of misinformation and removing harmful content. In other words, limiting the reach of misinformation according to the authoritative sources that we have defined, and removing harmful content according to the authoritative sources who don't want certain content distributed. Which is not to say that I think that harmful content can't exist, and certainly content which goes against YouTube's guidelines can exist. You're not allowed to upload pornography, you're not allowed to upload a beheading or something to YouTube, and I think that's very reasonable. But when they instigate this policy of harmful content, now it's all very broad and vague and difficult to pass, right? The work here is ongoing, and we wanted to provide an update. Removing content that violates our policies. Our community guidelines prohibit spam, scams, or other manipulated media. Coordinated influence operations, which is interesting because YouTube itself, therefore, is a coordinated influence operation on its own creators. And any content that seeks to incite violence, obviously. Although, again, the framing of this is interesting in that it says seeks to incite violence, not incites violence. This gives them a broad scope with which to obviously ban things which are on the fringes of that, in their opinion, which again, as we know, is fallible. Since September, we've terminated over 8,000 channels, which sounds like, it's a big deal, it's a big thing. But in the grand YouTube economy, that's not very many channels. So that's not particularly worrying to me. What's more worrying is thousands of harmful and misleading election-related videos for violating our existing policies. Again, their existing policies are to prohibit spam, scams, manipulated media, coordinated influence operations, and any content that seeks to incite violence. I'm just curious, because we've had this statement above here as well, connecting people, we've made sure we're connecting people with authoritative information, which is the mainstream media sources. It's NBC, it's MSNBC, it's CNN, and that sort of thing, as well as acceptable late-night newsy talk shows and that sort of thing. And are these not coordinated influence operations? I mean, are you saying that mainstream media has no bias whatsoever and doesn't seek to influence its viewership? YouTube. That's very interesting. Ah, dear. Over 77% of those removed videos were taken down before they had 100 views, and that tells me that it's automated, which is, again, quite concerning and blanket and cannot be trusted. We also work, to make sure that the line between what is removed and what is allowed is drawn in the right place. We are the censors, we know what we're doing, is the statement. Our policies prohibit misleading viewers about where and how to vote. No problem with that. We also disallow content alleging widespread fraud or errors changing the outcome of a historic US presidential election. A US election which is not concluded. And even if it does conclude, the trouble is that people do not trust what you consider to be an authority figure, YouTube, what you consider to be an authoritative source is. And people don't trust the authoritative sources from your authoritative sources list. And the only people who are watching this are elderly and stuck in their ways, or are students who have not discovered the internet yet, right? The point is, we're at an era of the most widespread distrust in the media that has been probably since time immemorial. And if people no longer trust your authorities to be authorities, why should they accept the results of this election? Why should they? Especially when the media has shown itself to be disingenuous and willing to just obfuscate, to obsess over minor sort of tabloid celebrity magazine style details like Rudy Giuliani's running hair dye, spelling mistakes in the opening of a legal statement, for instance, as opposed to the meat of the matter, the discussions being held. Again and again we see personal attacks on those involved as opposed to engagement with their actual statements. None of this, by the way, YouTube, for anyone who's watching, is alleging a widespread fraud. All it is doing is describing the behaviour of your so-called authoritative sources. However, in some cases, this has meant allowing controversial views on the outcome or process of counting votes of a current election as election officials have worked to finalise counts. Well, yes. It's not. First off, controversy is no problem to be discussed. YouTube is a platform which has courted its fair share of controversy. It's also a platform which is supposed to be about expressing yourself. Broadcast yourself. I know they don't use that statement anymore, but broadcasting yourself is about, in the political sphere at least, is about discussing controversial issues. And if you can't discuss controversial issues here, well, people are going to find other ways to discuss them. Or they're going to use other terms to basically get around your algorithm, and we're going to discuss what we want to discuss in our own terms. Yesterday was the safe harbour deadline for the US presidential election. Remember, that's 4 days ago. And enough states have certified their election results to determine a president-elect. Given that, we will start removing any piece of content uploaded today or any time after that misleads people by alleging that widespread fraud or errors change the outcome of the US presidential election in line with our approach towards historical US presidential elections. Again, I haven't seen any information which has corroborated that claim, that they have had this policy for the Obama years, that they've had this policy for, before then. Not seen anything for that. Also, the fact of the matter is that the safe harbour deadline does not change the fact that people are interested in whether or not this election has legitimacy. If all of the states certify, let's say, if all of the states have certified, it's ironclad, all of the legal challenges by Trump fail, but the behaviour of those who have cancelled those legal challenges, if the behaviour of those who have, in magnanimous victory, as it were, is suspect, why can we not discuss this? If the people who if the statistical improbability of a result coming in is still worthy of discussion, if the behaviour of those who are counting those votes is in question, is that not up for discussion? If the sworn affidavits of people, thousands of them, by the way, who are alleging election fraud, are whether or not they are liars or whether or not they are, bastions of truth, is this not up for discussion? Again, it's just limiting the scope of YouTubers to be able to discuss these things and provide things. And if I'm perfectly honest, YouTube, if there is a conspiracy theory, then you are promoting it, because the people who are not allowed to discuss this, if only the mainstream media would get off its arse and basically, if only the mainstream media would get off its backside and discuss the issues which the alternative, the new media, is discussing. If only they would give it, they don't have to give it credence, right? They just have to discuss the issue. They have to weigh up the evidence. They have to be journalists. But as we know, that's not what they're going to do. And so it is left to us to discuss the issues, to discuss the facts, and to provide it in an entertaining and engaging manner, sure. But it has to be, we are the only source of this information, and it is not disinformation, it is not misinformation. These statements are coming from authoritative sources, in the sense that, it's the legal teams of the opposition and the incumbent president, as he is currently. It is coming from the statements made by Joe Biden. It's coming from the statements made by citizens of the United States. It's coming from poll workers. It's coming from truck drivers, etc., etc. These are citizens who are directly involved in the electoral process. These are not just random voters. In many cases, some of them are voters who've said, "Look, when I came, I was given a Sharpie, for instance, or when I came, I was told that I could only vote in this way, or when I came, I saw this particular suspicious behaviour." And that's the whole reason behind these kind of big collective lawsuits. Each of these statements, each of these affidavits, is going to have to be verified one by one by one. You cannot get around that, and that should be up for discussion. And people should be allowed to take positions on it, because people are variable. If it turns out that there's this huge piece of information which certifies the US election beyond all doubt, then let it come forth. Let it come forth. Let it convince the masses. Let it prove beyond a shadow of a doubt that Joe Biden is the most popular US president in history. And people will have to accept it. There will obviously be some people who are incapable of accepting it, but you'll have to have some people who the vast majority of people will have to accept it. But that's not happening. The way this conversation is being curated by both YouTube, and by the mainstream media is disgusting. It is abhorrent. Connecting people to authoritative information. This is another thing we've already covered slightly here. The most viewed US election content: ABC News, NBC News, USA Today, CNN, and CBS. And the top videos from the same companies. So, again, these are authoritative sources, apparently. Sources with no bias whatsoever. None whatsoever. 88% of the videos in top 10 search results were from authoritative news sources, and you have put them on an authoritative news source list, despite the fact that they have no investigative journalism in this particular era. In the fact that they have no particular expertise in this particular area, the fact that they're avoiding the issues which are up for discussion, the fact that they're avoiding, they call Trump a crybaby and that sort of thing, they act very unprofessionally, and suddenly these are authoritative news sources. Why? Because they've existed for a while. An authoritative news list basically assumes that a news station can't fall out of favour. CNN could never become a non-authoritative news source from now on. It must always be treated as the authority. Ridiculous. We also showed information panels linking to Google's election results feature, which sources election results from the Associated Press. Again, the Associated Press is the Associated Press. It is not the Electoral College. And to the cybersecurity and infrastructure agencies rumor control page, so a singular debunking site for debunking election integrity misinformation alongside these and 200,000 other election related videos. Collectively, this has been viewed over 4.5 billion times. And blah blah blah. Today we will update the information panel linking to the 2020 Electoral College results page, noting that as of December 8th, states have certified presidential election results with Joe Biden as president-elect. It depends. Again, because we are talking about an unprecedented event in US history. We're talking about an event which calls into question the validity of the authority of the very states which are certifying these results. That should be up for discussion. It is not, under your policy. Additionally, since Election Day, relevant fact-check information panels, and list of those, from third-party fact-checkers, debunkers, were triggered over 200,000 times above relevant election search results, including voter fraud narratives such as Dominion voting machines and Michigan recount. Again, these are things which need to be investigated. It might go nowhere, but it needs to be investigated, and if it's being investigated, it should be discussed. If it's being discussed, it should not be dismissed. And therefore, you must always be able to entertain the possibility that there is some truth to the allegation. And you're not allowed to do that on YouTube as of this. They've also censored their recommendations, limiting the reach of borderline content and prominently surfacing authoritative information. And they basically have made it so that the top 10 authoritative news channels were recommended 14 times more than a top 10 non-authoritative channels. 14 times in order to compensate for the spread of new media. You have to give a handicap of 14 times the search relevance to mainstream. Amazing. Despite these encouraging results, I don't think they're encouraging results. We recognise there's always more to do. Problematic misinformation represents a fraction of 1% of what's watched on YouTube in the US. We know we can bring that number down even more. Well, how about fixing your platform first? Alright? We're continuing to... some videos, while not recommended prominently on YouTube, continue to get high views, sometimes coming from other sites. We're continuing to consider this and other new challenges as we make ongoing improvements. Are you going to ban the sharing of particular videos? Because that's what it sounds like you're going to do. It sounds like what you're going to do is you'll say, we're going to flag these videos. If we flag these as limited monetization or whatever, we will only allow, we will coordinate with our other business partners in Silicon Valley. We'll talk to Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram, say, even though it's all the same thing. And if these videos are shared there, they will get a lovely, great tagline, much like Twitter does, saying, this video, it contains harmful and misleading content, much as Facebook already does for videos on its site. I appreciate I'm giving them ideas now, but that's what I would expect them to do in the coming year. We understand the need for intense scrutiny on our elections-related work. Our teams work hard to ensure we're striking a balance between allowing for a broad range of political speech. A broad range when your authoritative news sources are given a 14 times handicap. Okay, YouTube. And making sure our platform isn't abused. Oh, no, you cannot abuse a platform to incite real-world harm or broadly spread harmful misinformation, blah, 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 that sort of thing. We'll apply our learnings, etc. Anyway, this is why you'll see many YouTubers unable to cover the US election as broadly as they would like to, or in the wake of the US election to discuss what happened in it, in the way in which they may want to. This is, make no mistake, this is not about combating misinformation. This is about promoting a particular narrative. And I feel I must once again reiterate to YouTube and its censors and to anyone who's watching, I am not using this video to allege widespread election fraud. That is not what I'm doing. I look forward to seeing you when this video is taken down. Take care, everybody. Have a great week. I'll see you all for Fake Accents Unite on Monday evening at 8:30 p.m. This is the design, which is done up by our good friend Owine. And you can get this in a variety of shirts and jumpers and whatnot. So enjoy that. Take care, everybody. Have a great weekend. Bye-bye.